Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're going to be taking this FMS Rock Hobby VW bug and we're going to be adding front bumpers, rear bumpers, sliders, a roof rack, and a small little ladder up the side. Alright, so let's get started. The project starts off with the roof rack. I'm using stainless steel material from Scale Metal Supplies. The tubing is bent so it roughly matches the shape of the roof. When working with bent tubing, there is a bend allowance which needs to be accounted for. When you need to make matching pieces, it's important to mark or note down the key measurements before you make the bend. This way the second piece can match the first. As most will know, the roof of a VW bug is anything but flat. Since I need somewhat of a flat space for the rack, a bend is needed about 2/3 the way back to angle down. The rear section is bent to match the front, but each side is made a little long. This will allow two pieces to be cut down so the fit to the roof just perfectly. A few tweaks are required to get the bends just right. If the bend is slight, you can do this by hand, but larger bends can be made by inserting back into the bender. I wanted to attach the two pieces of tubing as a butt joint. However, I wanted a little extra support. I took some solid metal rod that was just about the size of the ID and cut small pieces. These can be inserted to bridge the joint before brazing. The brazing is done with a MAP gas torch, safety seal 45 solder, and some flux. The first step is to put a little flux on one side and insert the solid rod. The nice thing about stainless steel from Scale Metal Supplies is it requires no cleaning before brazing. When the flux is slowly heated, it will do all the cleaning required. The solder wicks back into the hole and locks the solid rod in place by completely filling in the gaps. Once the two sections are in place, I turn to making the raised section. Small pieces of tubing are cut then notched before brazing to the lower frame. The process for making the lower piece is repeated and a second upper part is bent. This piece is a pretty close match to the lower one, but does have a steeper angle in the rear. Instead of maintaining the same distance between the lower and upper, the upper bends down to touch the lower in the rear. This is mostly done for aesthetics. After getting all the pieces together, the modular fixture table from Scale Metal Supplies is clamped into the vise. This allows me to securely hold all the pieces into position before brazing them together. The best part about this table is the ability to customize the mounts needed for the job. Here I have added some flexible arms with alligator clips. This way I can mount securely the base, but have another piece that is flexible enough to adjust when it's slightly off of a standard angle. This little FMS Rock Hobby VW bug is really taking shape. To start attaching this to the body, I make the side ladder / support pieces. These are solid rod and are a bit thinner than the tubing used on the rack. Small holes are drilled into the running board where the rod can be inserted. This is then brazed to the rack by using careful measurements to get the spread correct. The latter part of this comes from the second piece that gets installed. This is a shorter piece which is attached to the first and also gets inserted into a hole in the running board. Once I'm happy with the fitment, notches are cut to help mate it up and it's clamped in the vise. A little bit of heat and silver solder can flow into the joints and make it solid. Next up is the rack bottom, which is some decorative brass sheet. It gets cut and carefully tacked in place in a few key spots using some silver solder. There are just 2 points which hold this rack firmly to the Rock Hobby body. One is where the ladder slots into the running board. The other is a small tab which gets screwed into the roof. The front bumper was a real puzzle for me. There is no chassis to mount this to, so I had to get creative. First I bent to shape a single bar to span the front. The bumper has a solid rod running back, which is matched up to holes drilled in the fender. The underside gets a thin brass plate which can be bolted to the body. The rear bumper gets a similar treatment. I first start by bending 2 matched pieces of tubing. These are then attached together using the same technique as used on the rack. The difficult part of the rear is how the engine lid slings out from the body. Due to the height of the upper bar, the rear bumper had to be spaced out a good amount. This is not a problem only encountered on the scale version, since I noticed the reference material had to do the same thing. The vise is used to hold the tubing in relation to the top and bottom as well as in the correct orientation. It's so easy to get them slightly off, but since the piece gets clamped into the flat faces, they self-align. The same solid rod is used in the rear bumper to tie it into the body and act as the upper mount. Since the bumper gets held in place by the lower mount and some screws, the tight fit of the upper is all that is needed to keep it from rotating. In the back, there were 2 screw holes which I repurposed for mounting the rear bumper. Just 2 small screws is all that is needed to hold it firmly in place. I am super excited about how this VW Bug from Rock Hobby came out. It's an amazingly detailed model. I really hope I get a chance to work on more of these in the future. There is so much potential for what can be done. I'm sure I will get to see this little guy soon at an upcoming event, but until then, I'll see you on the rocks.